Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Awake and Empowered podcast. I'm Micheila Sheldan. I'm here with Ethann Fox, and we get a lot of questions posted to both our YouTube channel as well as our Facebook accounts regarding the topics we've been discussing here in the podcast. So we thought we'd dedicate this issue to answering some of those questions. Of course, many of those were directed towards the guides, which we're keeping on a separate list and may weave into some of the channeled revelations shows, but ultimately the best place to ask questions of the guides is during our live events, which we'll be bringing back here shortly. So I'll go ahead and start, and we'll just roll with these. And the first one I think is perfect for you, Ethann. It says, you say you're on a 9-year cycle when major shifts occur in your life. Is a 9-year cycle of change universal to all? Or is there a more precise numerological factor at play?
Okay, so this is a complicated question because we can never assume there's only one cycle at play, because there are many, many cycles at play, an infinite number of cycles, only some of which we can quantify or define ourselves. But there are certain cycles that hold more influence or that we can more clearly notice in our lives. As somebody who studied astrology and numerology for a very long time, I see so many cycles that are all interacting with each other. So while you may have a 9-year cycle, there may be other cycles at play as well that are interwoven inside that 9-year cycle. And so in some cases, someone, let's say in their 9-year cycle, at the very end of the 9-year cycle, you usually see a major transition that's happening in a person's life. But if there was some other cycle taking place, say halfway through the 9-year cycle, that also was a big transition period, you may see that happen in a 5th year, which is also a common transitional period in the 9-year cycle. So the answer to the question is, the 9-year cycle, I talk about it a lot because it's a very simple way that the average person who has no knowledge or very little knowledge of astrology or numerology can easily calculate and easily understand and put so much understanding into the life that they're going through and things that are happening at different times that you wouldn't otherwise know. And that 9-year cycle is very reliable. I've gone through my entire life and Micheila's life with the 9-year cycle, and very precise things happen at every year, and at the end of every 9-year cycle, when the cycle changes and comes back around to the 1 year again, I've always had very significant turning points in my life where the previous life I was living ended and a new one began. So I talk about the 9-year cycle not because it is the end all or it is the most precise, but it is something that anyone can calculate numerology on a piece of paper or on the top of their heads and easily know where they are in the 9-year cycle, and from that have really clear perspective on where they're standing now and what to expect in the upcoming years. So it's just one of the more simple ways, and I find it to be one of the most significant cycles in our lives, but not at all the only one. Now, if you decide at some point to really learn these things and take up a study of astrology and numerology, which will take decades to really get good at, then you'll see there are so many cycles at play and interplaying with each other that are influencing different things. And then you can really get more precise with your predictions. But for the majority of people, just using the 9-year cycle will give so much more definition and meaning to the circumstances that are taking place in your life, and will also help you to understand when somebody next to you is also going through different cycles than you, why things are happening in their life that may be different from yours. So it's just a starting point and just something that's easy for all of us to get into and to understand very easily, and not the end all.
Yeah, I want to add to that and say that I've actually gone through 9 years where the end of my cycle was extreme and dramatic versus 9 years where even though some of those elements were there, it wasn't exactly the same amount of intensity. So I think within those cycles, we have these varying levels of change that we're going through, even though the common themes are there. But also, as a mother, I find numerology to be extremely helpful for observing the cycles of my children. And we've even taught my kids astrology, and they use it with their friends and figuring out the numerology of their names and what cycles that they're in. And it's simple enough that the kids can use it, but I think it also brings some comfort and understanding during those more difficult years.
Yeah, and that's just want to point out what you said about the ninth year wasn't always as dramatic.
Right.
And that would be true for me, although for me, and it's just a factor of different souls and the journey they chose to have. For whatever reason, in my life, every 9 year cycle has almost been an entirely different life. So every 9 years, this recent one that I just went through a few years back, and is still, that transitional period is still taking place now, is probably the least dramatic of all of my 9 year cycles ending and starting over of my entire life, where in all previous times it was almost a catastrophic change where everything was changed in my life. Where this one, a lot of things fell apart and a lot of things started over, but not nearly to the degree in previous times. And so sometimes we as souls choose to have very dramatic changes so we can, in a manner of speaking, live an entirely different life every 9 years. But there are some people who didn't choose to have that significant a dramatic change, and maybe they, as one example, may get married in their teens or 20s and stay with the same person for their entire lives, maybe even work at the same place for their whole life, as an example. And every 9 years, while there may be changes in their life, it won't be as dramatic. Whereas other people, every 9 years, maybe they get divorced or start a whole new job or lose everything and start completely over. That's where, on a soul level, we choose those different experiences, but the cycles will dictate when those experiences fall into place. So it's kind of like we chose certain experiences, and the cycles that occur are triggers for those experiences. So, for example, if I chose to, for example, create this new filming studio and start these new podcasts, and it was going to happen at a certain point in my life, the trigger for that would have been when I'm going through my 9 year through my following 3 year, when that transition happens from what I'm doing formerly to the new thing. So that's how I would use these cycles.
So the next question is also about numerology. I had a great reset where I lost consciousness and feel I was reborn, embodying all aspects of myself. I was born on August 9th, 1981, and supposed to be in year 5, but it feels so different than that. Do you think it's possible to start over after the accident I had on July 24th, 2021? In other words, you think that a soul can transcend its numerology cycle if it has a mass awakening or a major shift in consciousness?
These are two different ideas that appear like they could be the same thing. The simple answer to your question is no. You can't transcend numerology or astrology, because as long as you're in a physical body in this life and you have a birth date in this life, that birth date is always going to indicate the numerology and astrology cycles. So let's say, for example, I'm born on the date that you mentioned, and that's my birthday. And prior to a year ago, that was my birthday. And today, I still think that was my birthday. Then that original numerology would still apply in my life. Now, in some cases, though, I would say, for example, let's take the Mandela effect as a construct for this idea. Let's say that a year ago, that birthday you stated was your birthday, but today, or after this awakening experience you had, you woke up the next day and suddenly your birthday that you thought was your birthday is no longer your birthday. And when you look at your birth certificate, it actually has a different birthday on it, but you remember just yesterday thinking your birthday was a totally different day. In that instance, if you actually have changed timelines to where now you're in a new physical timeline where your astrology chart, numerology, and your birth certificate are actually different, then it's possible you've shifted timelines. And in that case, you would use the new birthday. But you wouldn't use the date of your awakening experience that you're describing as a new numerology date, because that's not that would be more of a consciousness shift. So even though your birthday that you originally had is still the same in this new version of reality you're living, that spiritual experience you've had might have shifted your consciousness. So how that would play is you're still going to operate with the same cycles you've been operating since you've incarnated into this life, but the difference is that you will have a broader range of options. So whereas the previous version of you with the same birthday may see the world from a certain vantage point, the new version of you, which is using the same birthday and the same cycles, may go through each of those cycles now and see other options that you couldn't see before. That's what consciousness does. So whereas the cycles don't change, how you perceive your reality and the options you have available in each of those year cycles or whatever cycles would be broader. So as an example, let's say I'm in a year number 1, and I'm in a year number 1 prior to a consciousness shift. And in fact, a lot of consciousness shifts do occur in year 9 to 1 anyway. But let's say prior to year 9, I was of a certain consciousness, and then I moved over to year 1, and in the interim, I had a consciousness shift. I may still go through all the changes that would occur in that cycle, meaning my former life may fall apart and start something new in the 1 year. But the difference is the former self that I was of a lower consciousness might choose a path in that transition that is of a lower consciousness, meaning, let's say in my former life, I was working in a mainstream field. Let's just use something very generic. Let's say I was working for the pharmaceutical industry or the military industrial complex, and in my former life, and I didn't have a consciousness shift, and my cycles still change from 9 to 1. And what might happen is, well, maybe I quit my job or I get fired, and I start over again, and in my new life I get a new job in a different military industrial complex job or medical field or whatever. On the other hand, let's say in my 9 to 1 year I have a spiritual awakening, as what you're describing, but I'm still using the same birthday, so I'm still going to go through a transition. But now I may realize after that awakening that I can no longer align myself with that line of work that I was doing before, because now my awareness has expanded, and because of that, I see all these other options that are available to me that were not even something I could have perceived before. And I also feel like that thing that I was doing before isn't appropriate for me at this new consciousness level. And so therefore, maybe I go off and start something completely different that is a higher vibrational level version of who I came here to be in this life. So what you're essentially asking, as I said, the simple answer is no, the cycles don't change. But the reason you feel differently, like the cycles have changed, is because your consciousness has simply expanded. And because of that, your world is going to look completely different than what it looked like before. And to you, that may seem like you're working in a different timeline or a different birthday altogether, when in fact it's just a change in consciousness that you're seeing that has changed.
Yeah, I want to add to that, and I think we're going to speak to this a little bit more with the next question. But as far as numerology and even astrology goes, sometimes I notice we get some negative comments from people who don't want to get into those various modalities because it prophesizes for them a certain outcome. But I don't necessarily find that's the case. And actually, it's somewhat comforting to know where you're at in these various cycles, but also interesting to look back. For me personally, I've always found 5 years to be somewhat chaotic and difficult. They're my least favorite year really to go through. However, now that I've been following my numerology and I kind of understand the purpose of it, I can look back at how I went through those 5 years in the past and see how emotional I was and how I let the energy carry me as opposed to me being an observer of the energy. And I think that's really the true value of knowing where you're at in those cycles is you can choose to go through these various transitions and phases very consciously. And in so doing, you will make the most progress, even if it's not comfortable or it's challenging you in some way, because we're always going to be challenged, regardless of how much we like it or not, which we usually don't like it very much. But I do think it's fun, and I've observed, counting back in the years just to see what was going on in my life at that period of time, and then remember how I felt going through it, and in realizing what a different person I am today in terms of how I would have traversed the very same circumstances now in a 5-year today, which I'm actually in a 5-year right now, than I would have maybe like when I was in my 20s or in my 30s.
And then that's another point that you made that I think is worth talking a little further, and that is that not everybody going through a particular year experiences it at the same intensity. And even you going through a year like your 5-year in previous times has been more difficult, where this one has been a lot easier. If a soul has a lot of experiences they're meant to have in a particular area, and that particular area aligns with a 5-year, let's say, then that 5-year might be especially challenging. Whereas another soul, or even you, at a future 5-year, is not meant to go through those challenges or go through as intense of a challenge in that year or experiences that you were meant to grow through, then that 5-year will still show up in elements of your life, but it may not be as intense or as stressful as it normally would be. But again, the numbers don't dictate how we live our lives, and that's a thing. If a lot of people who don't want to believe in cycles, I mean, the sun still goes up and down, that's a cycle. And so day and night still occur, that's a cycle, and yet we've lived with those cycles. So now some parts of the world, they don't have the same day and night cycles, but nonetheless, there are cycles. There are cycles of winter, spring, fall, winter, where things grow and things don't grow. So we have cycles all around us, and numerology and astrology are just another cycle that helps us to interpret different things. For example, if you plant seeds in the spring, they may grow, whereas if you plant them in the middle of winter, they may not grow. So there are just certain universal laws we use in our physical reality that help us to traverse that path. But how you navigate those cycles is entirely up to you. Your approach to it is different from the thing that's actually happening. You can go through a cycle like, let's say, a 9 to 1, which for most people can be very difficult because they tend to be very dramatic changes that occur at those times. But you can go through it in an uplifted state, and that is entirely up to you. Just because things are happening and being orchestrated for you to have an experience doesn't mean it has to be a negative experience.
I'm going to break the next question into two. And this is more of a comment, but I think it's something we can speak to because it's referring to the law of attraction, which we've talked about a lot. I don't think that for something to work, it has to work 100%. Law of attraction involves humans, and we aren't really able to do or be anything 100%. It's all a part of our learning process. And I want to say, first of all, I agree that law of attraction is a universal law in a huge part of our experience. We are born and designed to magnetically attract things into our life that are meant for us. And I can look back on my life when I was introduced to law of attraction first, and studying Esther Hicks and all of those things. And there were things that I believed that I wanted, that I was putting law of attraction to work on. And they were definitely showing up in a bigger way in my life, in a tangible way in my life, but not exactly the way that I wanted. So definitely not 100%. And I look back now on that time in my life, and I am so, so grateful I didn't get those things because they were not at all meant for me. And so if there's any point I think we've been trying to drive home in these various podcasts when we've talked about law of attraction, It's that unfortunately, we've been led to believe there are things that we want that are so outside of what our soul had planned for us. And so I think that's why ultimately we think law of attraction doesn't work 100%. I think it's the universe stepping in and showing us that we're trying really hard to get something that is really going nowhere and not ultimately meant for us. So in that learning process, we're actually coming back more to ourselves to perhaps block out all of the things that have led us astray, to believe that there are things we need that we really don't need at all. I don't think that ancient civilizations were putting law of attraction to work in the same way we've been taught in this material density and dimension. I feel like it was more of a community effort. And even, the guides have said, when we meditate, when we practice, we are creating a coherent field. So everything that we need to attract is somehow being drawn to us if we are existing in our authenticity. And I think by its very nature, meditation helps us to do that. It puts us more in the present moment. It helps us to rest in that coherent energy and not have to want too much for anything. And I know desire and bliss and all that stuff is such a big deal right now on social media. Everyone's chasing their bliss and chasing their desire. Naturally, we're going to have desires and things that we want, but it's the naturally that is the word I think that's so important. Organic desire is very different than what we've been fed to believe that we want or need. So ultimately, I think that's why law of attraction doesn't necessarily work 100%, because we're trying to get things that aren't really in our soul's divine plan. And if we were to step back from that a little bit and just live in accordance with that plan, this is my experience, the things that will come into your life are far better suited for you than anything that you could visualize and imagine. And it's more of like a state of relaxation that we're getting into as opposed to control. So there's some reptilian influence in there. We talked a little bit about that in the podcast that I really believe has been seeded into these universal laws, using them to divert us from the gifts that the universe is already providing us, which are abundant and always present in our experience.
Yeah, I think what we're really, or at least I'll speak from myself, what I'm really saying is that the law of attraction is unnecessary. It's not, because imagine that the collective consciousness of the planet is a river flowing in a particular direction. And each one of us is a drop of water in that river. That river is flowing in this direction, and it's naturally weaving around the rocks and the stones, and it's going down that direction. And it was always going to go down that direction. Law of attraction is one of those drops trying to go in the opposite direction. So the river is trying to go this way, and the law of attraction is that drop of water that's trying to go in this other direction because it thinks it should be going this way. When the natural flow of the universe or our human experience is already orchestrated for us. So when we are trying to attract something, we're in resistance to what is. We're in resistance to the natural flow of the life we have chosen to experience. So the whole idea of law of attraction is a resistance-based concept, because it is assuming that you're not where you should be, and that by visualizing and using mantras or whatever, that you are going to be able to get somewhere else than where you're going to go. And the problem with that is you're still going to go where the river's going, because that drop of water is not going to be able to go backwards when the river is flowing this way. So all that happens is you waste a lot of energy trying to go in an opposite direction than where your life was always meant to go, because you, as a soul and as your multidimensional self, in your infinite wisdom, chose this path before you came here. And that path was to flow with this river in a particular direction and to naturally just go around the obstacles that it encounters along the way. But as human beings, using the law of attraction as a means of living our lives, we, using our minds, our intellect, and our reptilian consciousness, which has its strengths, but to use that exclusively to try to determine that this direction that we're going as the river, as a drop of water in that river, is not the right direction that we should be going, that instead we should be going this way. And maybe the marriage we're in isn't the right marriage for us. We should be with this other person, or the job that we have isn't the job we should have, and we just visualize the right job, we would end up getting that when it's flowing in this direction. And so what we want to do instead, so we're not saying, or at least I should say, I'm not saying to use the law of attraction at all. And that's coming from somebody who studied it probably more in depth than most people have. But what I'm saying is that what we actually want to do is to get into alignment and in non-resistance to the path of the river, or the path that we already came here to experience. And if we can get into non-resistance, then we'll lose the desire to use law of attraction, because you'll then start wanting the things that were already meant to happen. So instead of looking at where you are in your life and saying, well, I don't have the money I want, or I don't have the relationship I want, and I'm going to put these on a vision board and attract them. Once you get into alignment with the path that you came here to follow, you'll start wanting the things that are already right ahead of you in the path. And there's no need to attract anything. And you'll start to get into alignment with those things, and you will want that whatever career choice you make that is already in front of you, or you'll want that relationship that is already in front of you, or if you're not in a relationship right now, then you'll want that. So you'll start to find more harmony and peace in the journey that you're already on, and lose the desire to want to attract something else, because inherent in that is a resistance toward the life you chose to have, and that will never lead to happiness. And so it's not really about partially attracting something using law of attraction, and that's okay and perfectly valid. It's really about, the whole idea is not even important. Instead, getting into a state of non-resistance and neutrality about our human journey is what will lead to the greatest state of happiness. Because at the end of the day, everybody just wants to be happy. But because we're in this world where we're fed different ideas and propaganda about what happiness means, everybody's striving for essentially the same things. But we're not all the same. And once we eliminate all of that and we get into alignment with our own journey, we will start to anticipate and get excited for and naturally fall into the things that were always part of our path in this life, and therefore don't need to be attracted. They're just right ahead on the path of the river that we're already on. So that's what we're really trying to get at.
Yeah, I think sometimes law of attraction by its very nature is an aggressive practice, because what the guides say is, I mean, we are law of attraction in motion. So we are magnetically attracting all of the time. The problem is we're trying to jump out of the experience that we're in to something completely different. And unfortunately, from a material standpoint, the foundation of everything that we've created exists in the here and now, and that can all be upgraded. But we have to be participating in what we've already created in order for it to become better, 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 and better. So if we're ignoring the problems or the things that we don't want, and always visualizing and focusing on a better life that we want that exists way, way over there, it's a really hard connection, I think, to make. And ultimately, I think it's far simpler. And really, the guys have been teaching these simple techniques in many of my transmissions where, presence, simplifying your life, being in connection, in relationship, getting rid of technology, all of these things like social media that lead us astray. These things get us back on the natural path of attraction that we were born to participate within, I think. So the second part of this question has to do with astrology. It says, I've known several people who were told by respected astrologers not to marry a certain person, or that they won't have kids or won't get married at all. And then the opposite happened. My friend did marry the man she wasn't supposed to, and they're very happy with 3 kids and 11 years together. Another wasn't supposed to find love or get married until she hit a certain older age, according to her chart, but she got married to a great man and they're happy. So, what about these instances?
Okay, so just like anything else, if I went to med school and I graduated and I became a doctor, I'm not going to have the same experience level as I would after 40, 50 years of being a doctor. So you have to understand the same is true for astrologers. I'm not the same astrologer I was 30 years ago when I started studying astrology. And with every year, my knowledge and experience grows exponentially just through my own life journey and by studying more charts of people and my life in general. So you can't assume that every astrologer and numerologist is at the same skill level or are using the same tools for understanding it. Some astrologers and numerologists are more technical, and in the early stages when you're studying something like that, you tend to be more technical. You'll use a textbook, definitions and explanations for things. As you become more experienced, you start to understand astrology, numerology from a more knowledge base where you've moved beyond the technical and you start to see things that you can't find in any books or teachers that are out there, but that you've just discovered from your own experience of studying these sciences. So first of all, there's that factor. If you go to 10 different astrologers, the same chart, they're going to tell you 10 different things. And they may be accurate in different respects, but you won't necessarily get the same definition or interpretation from all 10 of them because they are all going to be at different understanding levels. They all are going to have different experiences themselves. The other factor to consider is every astrologer and numerologist, just like every human being, filters reality through their own consciousness and through their own experiences. So let's say if I was an astrologer who had a lot of really bad relationships in my life, then I might look at an astrology chart of somebody else who's coming to me and asking me about a relationship from that same sort of maybe cynical or difficult experiences because it's a filter through which I see reality. So I can look at the same chart and I may filter that reality that way. Whereas somebody else who's had great relationships might filter that reality that way. So you have to understand that there is that factor as well. And the consciousness level of the astrologer, just like the consciousness level of an alchemist, affects what they create in the alchemy lab, whether it be Ormus or something else, is also a factor in astrology numerology interpretations. Their consciousness will determine their access level to knowledge and information and wisdom. So a higher consciousness person may say entirely different things or may even interpret it differently. Now, in my past, there have been many couples who have come to me or individuals who have come to me who were getting ready to get married to somebody, and I looked at their astrology chart, and I could see that this was going to be a difficult marriage. But you can't always determine whether that person is going to get married because a lot of times people will choose marriages that are supposed to be difficult because it's just part of their whole karmic journey through life. And so to tell them you shouldn't do it because it's not going to work out, maybe it's not going to work out. And maybe those people that you're describing will get divorced someday. Hard to say without looking at their charts in more detail. But you can't determine that from the chart itself, but you can determine where there may be obstacles. Now, I've found that the majority, if not all, relationships that are out there, whether good or bad, have elements of difficulty in them. So I think we choose relationships in order to help each other grow. And sometimes that growth can be challenging. So we may choose partners where there are elements of argumentativeness or whatever, where you push each other's buttons in some way or another. That doesn't necessarily mean you're not meant to be together. It may just mean those are elements or areas where there will be friction. Now, if you get to a certain point where two charts have so much friction in them and difficulty between the two, then that may not be a marriage that is going to be very positive for you. Doesn't mean you won't get married, because certainly I have seen marriages or relationships in the past who had really difficult relationships or astrology charts or numerology charts between them, yet they still ended up together and stayed together for a long term. And sometimes you'll see difficult alignments between two people are the very things that force, or rather tie or glue, those two people together, even if the relationship isn't ideal. So, in these situations you're describing, what I would say is, without looking at those charts, I can't tell what the astrologers were looking at. And I may look at those two charts or those couples that you're talking about and say, oh, this is a great relationship, but these are some areas where there will be difficulty for sure. And that could be what those astrologers were saying. Meanwhile, they missed this whole other part where it could be a great relationship, but these difficult areas will exist. So, and there are certain other elements in the long-term cycles in people's astrology, numerology, which are very clearly obvious when somebody meets a soul-mate type of relationship where there's, deep love and respect for each other, but there's also friction. And in those relationships, those couples may stay together and have a great relationship, but they might bicker or disagree on certain things. That does not mean the relationship isn't going to work or they're not meant to be together. So this is a complex situation, but the simple answer to your question is, you can't necessarily assume that just because one astrologer told you that it is true. I think if with a question like that, if you're going to an astrologer to tell you whether you should be with somebody, you should go to a variety of astrologers at different knowledge levels, and preferably those that have at least 10 to 20 years of experience to get that kind of question answered. And then take all that they say and don't really necessarily accept the finite answer of yes, you should be with this person or not, but instead focus on where are the difficulties, because that astrologer may not be able to determine whether you should be together or not, but they may be able to determine where the problems are in the relationship. They may say, well, you're going to argue, or you're going to feel like it's a burden to be with each other, or whatever the case may be. And those may be true, but the end result or the conclusion that they're drawing, that, okay, because these difficulties exist, therefore you shouldn't be together, may not be true.
Yeah, I'm not an astrologer. Ethann's my astrologer, but this question makes me think about channels and guides and Akashic record readers, and I think it's really the same type of philosophy. You're really looking for someone who's not giving you a yes or no answer, and I rarely hear that from you in an astrology reading, at least for me. What I hear oftentimes is, well, we don't know how the people in that situation are going to react. We don't know what choices they're going to make. So it is truly a container of various influences, and we have the free will to operate within those influences. So like, we never hear the guides say, at least in my readings, I never hear the guides say, no, that relationship is not for you. Even when people come to me and they almost know without a doubt they need to get a divorce, or there's a situation where they need to break up, the guides might even say sometimes, hey, hang in there for a little bit. This relationship might become the one that you've always dreamed of if you're willing to be more vulnerable or to have that difficult conversation. Never cut it off before you've actually done the work to see if it can become what it is you desire. So I think if we have, these situations where a reader is telling us, no, you can't do that, it's not in your record, or an astrologer is saying, no, you can't get married because this will never work out, we should question the consciousness of that reader, because I don't think that there's ever any situation that's a definitive yes or no, that we should ever know about at this plane of existence. I think there's a higher aspect of us, in other words, that knows the plan, but the mystery of it is what we're here to experience. So if someone is taking all of the mystery out of your soul's and earthly experience, To me, that's really limiting in how it's here to serve.
Yeah, I want to maybe use us as an example.
Yeah, sure.
When I first met
As long as
Micheila,
it's good.
I hope it's good. When I first met Micheila, she came to one of our events, and she came to me shortly after for an astrology numerology consultation, and so I didn't really know her. You know, she was just somebody who would come to an event. But I could see very clearly in her chart that she was going to be in a relationship, or like a very good relationship, in the next upcoming years. And that was not something that we were even thinking about at that point. And it, what now? There was no way for me to know that it was going to be us in that relationship. All I could see was the container was there, as Micheila was using that example. The container meaning she was going to be in a more positive soulmate kind of relationship in the upcoming years. But I couldn't say for sure that it was me. So when you see those kinds of containers, you can't really make the forecast necessarily purely using astrology anyway. Now, if you have very strong psychic ability, maybe you can. Um, but as an astrologer, numerologist, purely using those technical tools, you can't definitively, you can probably make an educated guess that that's going to happen. But what you can say is there's this container and there's this amazing relationship that's coming with somebody. And so what I could say in that situation is I knew I was going to be right, and because that she was going to be with somebody in this very positive relationship. I couldn't have thought it was me at that point, and nor did that thought even occur to me at that point. So, uh, that's a thing we have to keep in mind: is astrology and numerology provide us with containers of potential, and when you're looking at a couple to forecast whether they should be together or not, you can't make a definitive response. Now, another example popped into my head many decades ago when I was not maybe 10 years or 5 to 10 years experience as an astrologer, so just new. My one of my close friends came to me, and she wanted to get married to someone in another country, and they had met here, and she wanted to go get married and move there to live with him. And I looked at their charts, and I recommended against it because I could see that this was going to be a difficult relationship. I didn't tell her, don't do it, or you're not meant to be married, because I couldn't really know that. But what I could see very clearly was it's not a good idea because this is going to be a difficult marriage. And she went there anyway, and she ended up marrying him, and a few years later they got divorced. So for me, that was very predictable because there was so much friction in the two people's charts. But I couldn't say definitively that this isn't going to happen because I don't know. What I could say is if this does happen, these are the difficulties that are going to be there. And if those difficulties are so extreme between two people, then I would say recommend that maybe that's not a good idea, or at least you should be aware that these things exist. And in a situation like that, I'd say start from day one with a counselor, or in some sort of an arrangement where you have really clear communication between each other, because this much friction between two people's charts may cause problems. But again, if I were to look at those charts today, having 30 years of experience as an astrologer, I may see a whole nother set of details and nuances that I couldn't possibly have seen so many years ago.
How does one live a Tantra practice as a single individual? This might be a good one for the guides, but I just wanted to touch on it really quickly. From what I've learned, and I've done a lot of channel transmissions on Tantra, Tantra is a practice between two loving partners. So it is a practice for sacred coupling. But I've had people ask in session, how do I find that sacred partner? I feel alone. I really want to invite a partner into my life. Can I practice Tantra on my own? And the guides always go straight to Kundalini. So remember, we have that coherent field around us of everything that we're supposed to experience, that source energy has in store for us. And what we're aiming for is to get in alignment with it. And I think a Kundalini type of breath can really help us in terms of becoming coherent and aligned, but also it's very restorative and very supportive and nourishing of the body, which I think in and of itself can invite a partner in anyway when we're feeling that sense of orgasmic bliss and arousal from a meditative practice. We're naturally in our brilliance, and we're more beautiful, we're more sensual, we're more confident, and I think that is something that is really helpful. There's a lot of information in some of my courses, very detailed practices to raise Kundalini. And actually, we addressed it in the last Channeled Revelations recording that's coming out. It'll come out for this podcast, so it'll be the one that just came out. So I'd encourage you to tune into that, because at the very end, the guides offered some information on how to raise Kundalini, which I think individually sets us up really nicely to be in an energetic partnership and relationship in a tantric type of practice.
Yeah, all I have to add to that is that as we're filming this today, that Channel Revelation show that Micheila is talking about has not been aired yet, so you'll seen that by the time this video comes out. But at the end of that video, I did ask the guides about what's the most important practice that the ancients that we discussed in that particular show were using, and they mentioned the Kundalini practice, and they describe it in a little bit of detail there. And I know this is a practice I've used throughout my life, and it's very simple. And in fact, they even, I believe, which I have to go back and listen to it, said that breathing is not a critical part of the process, that you can just breathe normally, whatever that is. But it's really just raising that energy, and there are certain functional elements. For example, you pull up on the perineum as you're bringing the energy up, and you keep your tongue on the roof of your mouth, and you basically are circulating the energy that way. And that the ancients didn't even have to use breath as part of that. They often would go long periods without breathing. So not that you should hold your breath. Obviously, most human beings need to breathe, but that breathing is not an important part of the process. And just by doing that, and I think if you do that, you prepare yourself for that tantric partner down the line. And the guides even said in previous Channel Revelation shows that if you do this solitary practice, if you're not currently in a relationship or a loving relationship where you can really have that tantric energy or chemistry between the two of you, using this practice will bring that ideal partner who can be a tantric practitioner with you, where you can do that together. So I've used this just sort of unknowingly throughout my life, not throughout my entire life, but most of my adult years, and have found it very beneficial. And I think that's probably also why my energy feels a little bit stronger as well. And I think that's something to consider.
If you're someone who has done any of the channeled courses that I offer, Lightworker Inner Circle 13 was highly composed of the breakdown of this practice. And I believe it was through Mary Magdalene. And we practiced it in all 5 channel transmissions. So if you're not familiar, you can go on my website and check it out. But it's a very simple breath that the guides teach, and the pause in between the inhale and exhale is critical. Not that you want to hold the breath to become, uncomfortable or to be straining at all. You just slightly hold between the inhale and exhale. And the guides teach an inhale through the nose, exhale through the mouth. The exhale is double the length of the inhale. That's just a gateway. It's not the way you have to practice it all of the time. But I notice what happens when I do that is just a few inhales through the nose with the double exhale through the mouth with a slight pause. It'll take me into a more mystical type of breath that is a little shallow. We were talking about that earlier. It's a little more shallow. But the breath kind of carries me. I don't have to think about it anymore. I'm just in a state where I'm raising that energy. So there's a lot of detail on that in the channeled content.
Yeah. So By the time you're watching the show, you probably have already heard about that in our last channel, Revelations.
Could you give some more information on red light therapy, please? I'm very interested in it, but have concerns regarding the safety of LED. What red light products are you using?
You want me to take that first?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, there are lots of products on the market, and they all have different purposes and uses. So you can't really, it depends on what you're trying to treat or what purpose you're using it for. For example, if you're using it to heal things on the surface of your skin, you may use yellow light instead of red, or even blue light. For example, acne, blue light is very effective for acne. Yellow light tends to be better or more effective for complexion or collagen building, for example, where some of the frequencies of red light are beneficial for deep tissue healing. So if you've got muscle issues or muscle healing, or even any kind of injuries that you're trying to heal, different wavelengths of red light are more beneficial for that, whereas yellow light doesn't penetrate the skin very well, so it's not very good for that. But so you may want to use some combination depending on what you're using it for. One of the most popular brands, which we don't use, and I don't think it's necessary. Also, I think one of the most expensive brands is Juve Light. But I will say the quality of their products is extremely high. So if money's not an object, and Juve is a brand that you like in terms of quality, I think it's very good. But Micheila uses I can't remember the name of
Red
the
Rush. It's
Red
Red
Rush is
Rush.
the name of the product, but I think the actual company is Red Therapy or Red Light Therapy. I can't recall, but
Something like that.
if you just look up Red Rush LED Red Light Therapy, you'll probably find it. But they're also very high quality, not as expensive as Juve, and so their products are not as refined looking. Where Juve it just looks nicer from a design standpoint. Where Red Rush, in some respects, is more effective because it's more. They tend to have a higher power LED lighting setup than I think Juve does, but they're not as pretty to look at. So there's that factor, and they're also less expensive, and that's why she has that. I use one and so hers is a much higher power one. It mounts on a wall, and you stand in front of it. Whereas mine is a bed that you lay on, and so the intensity of the LED lighting is a lot less because it's touching the skin. So if I were to lay on what she's using at a distance, it for most people could be very uncomfortable or may cause very quick effects or radical changes in the body that could be uncomfortable for a lot of people. So I use one. I think I don't actually think you can buy them anymore. It was a product that was available a few years back, and it's not available anymore. But they do have other products. I don't think to the same level of development as Red Rush or Juve, for example. I believe it's what is it? Something. Yeah, it'll come to me. I can't think of it. But anyway, it's not available anymore. So, but I think Red Rush is a good product. So if you are interested in red light therapy only, then that may be one worth looking into. And their products are very high quality. Now, in terms of LED lighting and the concerns about the frequency of LED lighting, I understand that. I mean, I was in electronics when I was very young, and LEDs were just a cool thing we played around with back then. Who knew that it would end up being such a big deal today? And as we're sitting here today, our entire studio is powered by LED lighting. I mean, I think there are advantages and disadvantages to everything. One of the benefits of LED lighting is, like in a studio setup, you can choose the frequency of the light, and you can shape it into anything you want, whether it be a flat panel or an oval or a circle or anything. Can't do that with incandescent lighting. So in my case, wherever in my environment I'm spending a considerable amount of time, I tend to use incandescent lighting. So in my office, I use incandescent lighting. In the studio, though, because of the practical nature of the lighting having to be at a certain temperature or frequency, LED lighting just works. So I understand the concern about LED lighting, and I think in general, we should try to be in an incandescent environment whenever possible. But it's okay to use LED for accent lighting or studio lighting where it's necessary, or in LED therapy devices, because yes, there is concern over the LEDs, but in a therapy setting where you're using it as a healing device, that concern is not a concern because the benefits you're getting from the LED red light far outweigh the disadvantages of it being an LED. We can't get the same benefits from an incandescent based lighting as we can from an LED therapy bed like I have, or panel like Micheila has. So we shouldn't, we shouldn't mix the two things together. But in your environment, that's certainly something I would consider. I have LED lighting throughout my environment, but not in any area where I spend a lot of time, and only in areas where what I'm trying to do isn't possible or be very difficult to do with incandescent. So that would be my rule of thumb with that sort of thing. And you use LED, Micheila also has different kinds of other therapy devices that use LED lighting, but at different frequencies, different wavelengths. For example, she has devices that have blue and yellow as well as red, and those are good for skin-related things and also pain treatment and things like that, or complexion or collagen building. So, and she has LED laser type of devices that are used for healing certain parts of the body. You just can't do that with incandescent. And in those instances where the device is calibrated specifically for a treatment purpose, we can overlook the fact that it's LED because the technology provides so many advantages that are just not possible with incandescent. So always keep these things in context. There are positives and negatives to everything, but if you use the things that are positive in ways that they are beneficial and not in the ways that they are detrimental, then I think we come out ahead in all respects.
Yeah, I think the benefits definitely outweigh the negatives. And for me, I use it for inflammation, cellular repair, anti-aging, all of that stuff. But I will tell you, I had to build up. And I think it's not for everybody right off the bat. And you should evaluate or prioritize, where you're at in terms of your health. Because if your energy is real low and you're sick and you're weak, a couple of minutes in front of that thing and you're done. And that's where I started. I'm up to 20 minutes now, which is the max on my unit. But I could tell right away I felt a little sick, a little dizzy. And the second you feel that way, you're done. So you really have to pay attention to how you feel and have a good relationship with your body, trusting how you feel to manage, I think, various detox symptoms and things like that can come up. But I think they're great. So. Okay. Do you deactivate 5G on your phones and or use tools like Shungite to help with these frequencies?
You want to start with that, with what you do?
I do many things. I definitely have Shungite in my home, a lot of crystals strategically placed that Barb picks out for me that she can literally see absorbing the energy. I have used various technologies and devices on my phones and my electronics in the past, but I can't really say for sure that they made that big of an impact. There's so much out there right now, and plus we have to keep in mind that there is so much that's changing. I actually have a biofield device that I really like, and it creates a field around me. So often during the day when I'm working and I need to have my phone next to me and I'm in front of my laptop, I'll put it on, and it has settings for EMF, for radiation, for things like that. But, the biggest, I think, simplest thing that I've done that's made a huge impact on my body and on my life is I leave my phone outside of my bedroom when I sleep. And I know that sounds silly, but that's a whole, 8-10 hours sometimes that you're in your room without that phone next to your body. And sometimes we have to carry a phone. I know Ethan does, he's got a lot more information on that, far more than I do. But I think the simple things we have to consider, if we've got that thing in our pocket all day, if we got it in our hand all day, we're just going to suffer the consequences. So for me, it's just putting it aside and only picking it up when I need to, and then taking the measures that I need, which I always change and upgrade. I've used a service in the past that has upgraded the frequency of my home. I've used various technologies that have been created by people channeling extraterrestrials in my home. And sometimes for a while they work, and then I can feel the shifts that take place either underground, geopathic stress zones, or just in my neighborhood. We've got a lot of man-made frequencies right now, and unfortunately an onslaught of, negative frequencies that are trying to keep us suppressed. So we always have to feel into our sensitivities and I think make adjustments. And that's basically what I do.
Well, this is a big topic for me, but I'm going to try to stay as concise and short and brief as I can. I think there are two things to consider here. One, there is the blocking or eliminating of the electromagnetic or the frequency radiation. And so the difference there is when electromagnetic is like our electrical outlets, for example, or if you have a power line running through your backyard, for example, that's electromagnetic. The frequency radiation comes from microwave towers, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, cellular, things like that. So we have all of that in our environments these days. And there are two ways to treat these things. One, you eliminate it or block it, or two, you treat it. And a lot of the devices that are in our metaphysical circles these days that are supposed to block radiation, or those little adhesive stickers you stick on your phones, they don't actually eliminate it. So just to be clear, and I know that because I have testing equipment. So if you put a little sticker on your phone or even a shungite next to your bed or wherever, it doesn't eliminate the frequency coming off of the phone or the Wi-Fi or anything, because if I use a testing device, I can still test it. So it's still there. But the difference is between eliminating or blocking or treating. And this is where things like shungite or maybe some of those stickers or devices that people sell, I can't speak to all of them because some of them probably don't work. But so if you treat it, then you may alter the vibration of the space such that even though the electromagnetic radiation and frequency radiation is still there in the room, it's not really affecting you in an adverse way, or you're wearing it on a pendant or something. And even though it's there in the room, it's not affecting you because that pendant is altering your body's frequency in such a way that those other adverse frequencies are not affecting you. So there are these two things we need to make clear, that when we're using spiritual or metaphysical materials or tools to treat the electromagnetic radiation or frequency radiation, it doesn't eliminate them. It just simply, if it works, it changes the frequency of your environment or your body such that it's not affected by the radiation that's still in the room. The other way is you eliminate the radiation in the room. And that can be achieved a lot of different ways. So now because I have a lot of testing equipment, I walk around my environment and I test everything. And so if there's a place where I spend a lot of time, like whether it's sleeping in the bedroom or it is in my office, the two places where I spend the most amount of time, I actually test the frequencies in those environments to make sure that they are the lowest possible. And if not, I would find ways to treat it. Now, in the case of my phone, a lot of people are afraid of 5G towers and these kind of things, and certainly those are concerns. But in my experience, testing the actual reality of the environment that I'm in, my phone or iPad or anything that's transmitting Wi-Fi or Bluetooth or cellular is a much bigger offender than the cellular tower that's 5G that's a mile down the road. It may be a problem, And if there are a lot of them in my area, certainly that is hazardous to health. But the phone that's in my hand or sitting next to me on the table is much worse than those things out there. So in my case, one of the things I do is I measure the frequencies and the radiation of the environment where I spend the most time, and I try to minimize that. I may minimize that by keeping my phone turned off when I'm at my desk if I don't need to use it, or I'll keep it somewhere far away where I can hear it if it rings, or if something happens. Or for texting, I use an app on my computer so I don't have to use the phone. So the phone is actually, I have multiple phones, and the ones that are actually used for calling are far away, where I can hear them, but they're not anywhere near me. And the one that I may keep around me is always the Wi-Fi is turned off, Bluetooth is turned off, and I can test it at that point and see that there's no radiation coming off of it. Another thing you could do is you could put it inside a pouch that's shielded, that prevents the radiation from escaping. But of course, it won't ring or receive any messages or anything if it's in there. But at least you're protected from that radiation getting out. So, so in my case, I'm always checking the environment to make sure that the radiation is as minimal as possible. And if it's not, I'll remedy that. And so what I do nowadays is the phone that's sitting next to me on the desk is always turned off. And I, if I need it to be on, or if I need a phone to be on, I'll keep it far enough away from me to where the radiation effects are not that dramatic. So those are factors you need to consider. And until you test your environment, you may not know, because there may be something sitting there that you didn't even know was there that's causing a problem. Or in the case of Wi-Fi, we both turn our Wi-Fi off at night. And even during the day, I have my Wi-Fi device, or the one that transmits Wi-Fi around my environment, inside a metal shielded space that reduces the intensity of the Wi-Fi radiation so that it's not affecting me as much as if I just had it sitting out in the open. So, and these are things that I can test for to see how intense it is. So I make those kinds of changes in order to mitigate. Now, in your case, maybe painting the walls with some sort of EMF shielding paint would help. But then the problem is, if you have Wi-Fi in the house and your phone in the house, and you've got all the walls painted with shielding paint, you're now bouncing that frequency back into you and further intensifying the intensity of the radiation coming off your phone. So I would say if you can avoid keeping your phone on and right next to you at all times, or an iPad or any Bluetooth device, or any Wi-Fi enabled device or Bluetooth enabled device, it's okay to have them, but have them away from you. Then that would be ideal. And not handling it all the time, like everybody's on their phone these days, and the amount of radiations you're getting from one of those is way higher than any 5G tower. That's unless you're living right next to a 5G tower. So that I think is something to be aware of, and certainly I would advise against using the Bluetooth in-ear headsets that are so popular these days. I actually have one that I thought was a great idea when I got it, until I tested it and realized the amount of radiation being transmitted in between my ears and into my brain was even worse than the phone I was holding in my hand. And same thing to do with the smartwatches and so on. So we want to try to reduce and minimize all of those things that are in our environment. And if you're living in a major city with a lot of people, then that may be a bigger issue for you. But there are always things we can do between shielding or getting rid of the EMF or frequency radiation, to conditioning it with things like shungite or various other new technologies out there. A combination of those things, and also from our earlier conversation, doing that Kundalini practice kind of eliminates all of those problems, because if you use that practice and continue to build your energy field over time, eventually you kind of have a natural barrier or filter between you and that radiation. So that's a great way to even, at no cost, with no effort. Of course, it'll take a little time to build that, but you use a combination of those things, and you can live in this world without those adverse effects.
Yeah, there's so many different things that you can do. Another technique that I've learned is miso, which
Hmm.
has been shown to create a radioactive protective field in the body. So it helps to detoxify and pull out all of that radiation. So I think we have to address this from so many different angles, physically, vibrationally, and all of that's going to change.
Yeah, and with regard to that, I'm not sure about meso and electromagnetic, or if it was more like radiation,
Radiation,
right?
it's
Yeah.
radiation.
So, like, if
Hmm.
you're living in an area where, like, right now in Ukraine, or for example, or where there's a nuclear reactor meltdown or something, and of course nowadays there's a high level of radiation in our environment anyway.
Yeah.
So I think with what Micheila is saying about the miso, now miso is more effective with radiation, like from radioactive disasters, or even all the depleted uranium that's being used in wars around the world. We have a very much higher level of radiation on the planet today from those sources than we've ever had. And that's only going to increase because these wars and nuclear disasters are going to be ongoing for some time to come. The more that we use nuclear power for power in the world, we're going to have more and more radiation that's going to be permeating. So I think that's another kind of radiation that we need to be aware of. And so foods like miso are very beneficial for mitigating things like that. But that's a whole other topic outside of what we were talking about. So let's just move on to the next thing.
This is a great question. It fits with everything we've been talking about here. Does a person who avoids everything he thinks is dangerous and constantly trying to do the right thing, lowering his vibration?
You want me to take that first, or you go ahead?
Well, I think it's all in how you do it, and this is personally what I believe and what the guides have taught me is that when we become highly conscious, it's like expanding the lens on a camera. So we're getting a wider angle view of the landscape of our human reality, things that we didn't even realize existed. And that's going to include light and dark, good and bad. And that's why I think over the last couple of years, so many of us have come into these huge awakenings about the level of evil that's going on in our government agencies and really across the board here on planet Earth. The question is, what do we do about it? And I know there are a lot of spiritual teachers and teachings out there that are focused on avoiding the problem. Because if we perceive the darkness, we are going to invite that vibration into our reality. But I think it's all in how you perceive it. And if we become conscious of something, I wonder, why would we want to disclude it from our experience? Because everything that we're aware of is helping us to cultivate a better relationship, not only to ourselves, but to make the choices that we want for the earth that we all want to live on. So for us to exclude things from our vibration because they might bring us down could actually hamper our ability to continue to ascend. And I wonder if some of these programs aren't planted. So if spiritual beings who are ascending are being asked not to look at the problem because it lowers their vibration, then the people who are creating the problems have the greatest advantage at their fingertips ultimately, because they can do a lot of things that nobody really sees. So I think how we choose to interact with these things and use them for benefit in our lives, to create our lives to the solution, is ultimately the purpose. And if we're in fear and we see these things and we use them as the excuse to not want to be on planet Earth, or to believe that humanity is going in the wrong direction, I think we've got it all wrong. Because ultimately, the problems that exist, I think, are far easier solved than what we have been led to believe. So just because we're seeing something that we don't like doesn't necessarily mean that it has to lower our vibration. And the other part of this question is doing the right thing, which I think that probably comes from our podcast where we talked about awakening isn't easy. It's not fun. And I think again, it's all your personal experience. So for me, I look back on so many changes that I've made in my life as I've awakened. I've definitely taken a far more rigid and narrow path when it comes to food, um, alcohol, who I surround myself with, the activities that I choose. And some people may look at those choices and think that I'm suffering, or somehow I'm trying really hard to maintain my vibration. So I'm making choices to do things that aren't really fun for me. But I just don't feel I could live any other way. I think the more that I've awakened, it's been necessary, or just a natural evolution for me to choose things that are better suited for the body that I want, for the consciousness that I want, for the spiritual connections that I want. So I feel like I'm a better person for it. And I think if there's something that you feel is hard and you don't want to exclude it from your life, by its very nature, it's probably something that you're resistant to. That and the guides always put it beautifully. You know, if there's something that we don't like, we have a food addiction. You know, we're drinking alcohol. We're doing something that is bad for our health or for the environment. What we're being asked to do is to be very neutral about it while we bring higher vibrational things into our life. Because really, the more practices, lifestyle changes that we adopt that are helpful for us, the less we have to worry about these old patterns that are hanging on. They're just going to, by themselves, begin to fall away. And that's really what I've noticed. The more I ascend my vibration and I choose to live in a certain way, the less I really want to go back and do things that I did before that perhaps weren't good for me. So if you're feeling like you have to do something in order to ascend your vibration, I would never go about it from that stance, because again, it's a very aggressive way of looking at life and human experience in general. What we're going for is to live in alignment with what we love. And hey, if for you that's eating a hamburger on a Saturday night, who's to say that that's lowering your vibration? And we talked about there's physical considerations for everything. And the guides bring that in so brilliantly into every one of my transmissions. If we think we're just going to work one side or another, we're never going to ascend. So if we're just focused on the vibrational piece, we're missing out on all of the physical choices. And those things are so important because we came as physical souls. So there are positives, negatives, advantages, ramifications to everything that we do. And I think we're attempting to do those things in balance.
Yeah, I think the question is really more to do with way of being than it is
Yeah.
with what you're doing. Now, I know more of the things in the world that are not going the way that I want than most people know, or at least if we're going to call it evil, I know more about the evil things in the world than the majority of people do, because I'm constantly reading and watching videos, and every spare second I have, that's what I do. Because it fascinates me. But for me, it's not a disempowering thing. It's not something that I look at in a negative frame of mind in terms of how I live my life. So you can look at life any number of ways. You can look at it as you're avoiding doing the things that you hate or the things in the world that you think are bad, or you're moving toward things that you love. So let's take the last few years as an example. There are a lot of things happening in the world that I didn't really like. And a lot of people maybe out of fear or just choosing to go along with the mainstream consensus, went and did things that they wish they hadn't done. I didn't do those things. I didn't agree with those things. And so I just went about my life and instead moved toward other things that actually were more positive. And that's the difference that we need to look at is you don't have to look at it as you're avoiding all the bad things in the world, as opposed to you're moving toward things that you like. So, as an example, if you think eating certain kinds of foods is evil, or our food is all toxic and therefore you should eat a certain way, that can be a negative. You may look at that as, well, I can't eat all these things that I used to eat before that I really liked. But on the other hand, in a state of non-resistance, you may find all this other great food over here that you really love, and you don't even think about that food that you used to eat. I mean, I used to eat mainstream food 30 years ago, and I didn't at that point know any better. Whereas now, because of everything I've learned over the decades, I just wouldn't touch any of that again. And so my diet these days is an extreme. And if I go to, say, a family event or for something like that, I can't eat anything there. But for me, it's not a I can't eat those things and I wish I could type of situation. It's more, I just don't crave those things anymore because I'm pulled over here instead. So so it's possible to be that way, and I think that's what we need to move toward is not looking at all the things in the world that are going down the wrong path that we don't want to be a part of, and feel like we're missing out on something, but rather move toward things that are equally or more or even more so exciting and fun and fulfilling for us, to where we feel like our lives are better because we've let go of all those things. And I, of all people, participate in mainstream things the least of most people, and as I've talked about on many of these shows, I live a very alternative, very fringe existence, and that I can't talk to just anybody about because most people would think I'm insane, or they at least, or they would eyes would glaze over and they wouldn't understand. But for me, all those mainstream things that everybody else does don't appeal to me anymore. So, so I think that's how you have to look at it. I think that answers the question, right? Is that, did I miss something in there?
No, I think that's good. And I think the perfect example is Ethan and I went to a family gathering over the weekend. And I think the assumption is when we're together, we have to follow certain societal rules in order to have fun. At least that's what I've noticed in some of my, family friends. We get together and have a drink, we get together and have a meal, but we're really there to interact with people. It was a birthday party for my niece. We wanted to wish her a happy birthday, check in with my parents, give everyone a hug. We didn't have the alcohol, we didn't eat the food because it just wasn't for us, but we still had a great time, right? We went home and had our organic salad and soup when we when we got there. And I think that's what people struggle with is making these decisions to align with a higher vibration or to live that lifestyle is going to cause you to be excluded from, certain things or family or gatherings. And, I often bring something to contribute when it's a family gathering that I know we would love, but I also want to share with others. So I think there's so many ways to do it. And, we're certainly not suffering by any means. In fact, I feel like more and more I'm thriving. So if you go where you thrive and you choose what you love, you can't get wrong. Yeah. I'm going to put this question in. It was at the end, but I think it's a good place to answer it. Can you talk more about purifying and cleansing your body and what type of diet that is? There are a lot of health issues with some foods, and diets have been scientifically proven. Oh, sorry, some foods and diets that have been scientifically proven. Studies are showing that a meat-based diet with very low carbs is optimal for health. Can you speak more on this?
I can start. It's probably your expertise more than mine.
Well, I'm very hyper focused on health. diet, detoxification, you name it. So Ethan's doing all of his research on the crazy stuff that's going on in the world. And he's very into longevity, and I research a little bit differently. And what I can say after, probably 9, 10, even 11 years of having this hyper focus on my health is that I could find a scientific study to back up any diet on the planet at the moment. So the question is, not what's been scientifically proven or shown to be good for humans, but what actually works for you. And how do you need to adjust and change that throughout your evolution? Because for me, diet has changed drastically. And I personally do not believe that there is any one diet that is best for any one individual. But you're asking about purifying and cleansing. And I think the most important consideration is the quality of the food. Because as you said, of course, there are dangers in our food supply today, toxins and all of these various things that we had, genetically modified organisms that we have to avoid. I think if you make any one change in your life, going more organic to the level that you can, and reading labels and simplifying to whole foods, I think across the board is going to change your health dramatically. And that's what I've done. I've been a vegan. I've been a raw vegan. I've brought in fish and eggs. I personally haven't eaten any meat since I was, before I channeled, since my awakening. I didn't decide to cut meat out vibrationally, and just from a ascendant perspective, I couldn't do it anymore. Didn't resonate with me as a human being. Still doesn't resonate today. So my advice is go for the pure things, the simple things, the whole foods, and you can't get it wrong.
Yeah, Micheila and I are very different in this respect because we have entirely different approaches to health. But there's a lot of similarity too. And diet too, because Micheila loves to cook, and so she likes to make elaborate meals that taste amazing and look amazing. I am simple. I've always been simple, even as a young child. Just to tell a funny story that nobody's heard but you and a few other people. I mean, when I was a very young child, I think 5, 6 years old, I have 2 younger brothers, and my middle brother liked to eat. And so he's like the polar opposite of me. And when my mother had her back turned, I would dump my plate of food onto his, and he would happily eat it, and I didn't have to eat it. So in that respect, I'm still the same. And so my food choices are very simple when I'm by myself. So which most of the week I'm by myself. So I basically eat very, very basic, simple things, and wherever possible, prepare them myself. And as Micheila has mentioned, I was a raw food vegan for many years, vegan vegetarian throughout the majority of, well, at least the last 30 years of my life, off and on. And nowadays I've come around to more of a longevity-based approach. So most of my diet on a typical day is supplements, and that I've specifically chosen for certain longevity benefits. And then whatever food I eat is really just so I can take supplements. It's not really because I crave a particular food, and I don't really crave particular foods. So my diet wouldn't really fit for most, if not all of you, because I have no real desire for food in that sense. I can eat anything. And so because of that, nowadays, from time to time, I'll eat eggs, but they are eggs that are from free-range chickens, for example, or we buy avocados and cheese from actual organic farmers, and grass-fed cows, that kind of thing. So I'll eat that as just a transport system for supplements, not really because I'm craving that particular food. So on a typical day, My diet is extremely minimalistic. I have a drink in the morning that's a whole bunch of Chinese herbs and cacao and very heavy and healthy fats like grass-fed ghee and cacao butter and um, nut butters that Micheila actually makes her own nut butters. So things like that. And of course, I use that as a transport system for supplements that I take in the first half of the day. So my diet is really a transport system for supplements. It's not really for the food itself. And because of that, I don't really care what it is as long as it's a whole food as whenever possible, as clean and simple as possible. And I don't think you can make a generalization about certain diets being good for certain people. For example, I'm 55 years old now, and I've lived perfectly fine not eating meat, fish, chicken, or any of those things for the last 30 years, the majority of the last 30 years. Well, I should say 20 years for sure, but off and on for 30 years beyond that as well. So, and prior to that, I was eating meat like everybody else, and junk food and colas and things like that as a child. Um, so, so I don't think you can make that generalization for everybody. And I think the problem with food these days is not whether it's a meat-based diet or a vegetarian-based diet. The problem is that there's so many toxins in our environment and in our soil, and that soil is in everything. So we grow food in that soil. Doesn't matter if you're growing it organic. If they're spraying chemicals in the sky, it's still organic, but the soil is still being adversely affected by the chemicals being sprayed in the sky. So I think this is why a lot of people have health problems these days. And, many well-meaning researchers and scientists and doctors are coming up with these diets that they test on a handful of people and determine that this diet is great for most people, when I don't think that's true. I think that they're finding generalizations that may apply to a handful of people on that particular time, but 2 years from now, it may not even apply to those same handful of people because there's so many other factors that are affecting our health. As we were talking earlier, electromagnetic radiation, soils are adversely affected by all the different things that we're doing in our environment. And even if you eat meat, if it isn't grass-fed, organic meat that you're eating, then it may not be beneficial anyway. So if we choose a diet that's meat-based, but we're eating the most toxic meat you can possibly eat, then that's not going to be good either. So I think the key component here is get back to simplicity, as Micheila was saying. The most basic, simple foods that you know are going to be the most free of toxins. Preferably, you're preparing it yourself so you know what's in it. Read the ingredient list. Make sure there's nothing extra or any hidden ingredients that you can't identify. And if at all possible, buy direct from farmers whose growing practices you at least trust or you know for certain are the most pure that's possible. Keeping in mind that even those farmers, even if their soil is organic, they're probably still having chemicals sprayed on it from the sky. So it's not perfect, but you want to get as close to perfect as possible, and that would be, my recommendation. I think that's where we overlap in terms of that. Where Micheila makes very elaborate, amazing meals, my food is pretty boring. But what's true about both of them is they're very simple. They're simple and they're as clean as possible under the circumstances in which we live.
Right. Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with eating meat as long as you're doing it in a clean and responsible way because you don't want the antibiotics, you don't want the hormones, and you definitely don't want all of the chemicals. I think we're going back to, back to the farm, back to the simplicity of knowing who has grown and produced our food because vibration is so important. And we forget that in today's world, these highly processed meat plants, animals are in a state of fear. So that vibration is just as present in the meat as, the hormones and all of that other stuff. So I think it's really important to know where your food is coming from and to make sure that it's coming from a place that you're in alignment with.
Yeah, I think that's a good point there because, and we even talked about that in one of our previous channel revelation shows where I was asking about Ormus and whether using white powdered gold was better than just using colloidal gold. And because white powder gold is affected by the alchemist, right? And they said, well, colloidal gold is also being touched by a lot of people in the factory where it's made and the process that it goes through. And I think that's a concern or a factor we need to consider when it comes to food, which is, when I was in my late 20s or 30s or something, I used to work at a restaurant as a waiter, and it was inside the behind the doors of the kitchen area. It was a chaotic disaster where people are screaming at each other, and there's all this hostility. And out in the restaurant area, everything's nice and peaceful, and it looks perfectly harmonious. You don't understand the impact that hostile environment in the back room is having on the food that's being prepared. So the people eating in the restaurant are eating that toxic energy that's imbued into the food. And this is why the purest food is the best, and so food that you're preparing yourself versus if you go to a restaurant, you don't know what that environment is or who's preparing it or what kind of mood they're in that particular day, or if they're arguing in the back room. This is all going to affect the food. So the idea of what is the best diet is a bigger consideration than the physical components of the food. Like you're talking about, the energetic components make a big difference. So in that case, going back to the basics, dealing directly with a farmer, because now you've got one point of contact. You don't have the farmer and the food is being shipped to the grocery store and multiple people are handling it and then you finally get it, or going to the restaurant where there is an extra step. Each layer is being affected by different people in different environments, and it's affecting the vibration of the food. And whereas if you're buying direct from a farmer and you are preparing the food using as pure ingredients as you possibly can, then and you're preparing it with love and in a harmonious environment, that food is going to have a more beneficial effect. Doesn't matter what the diet is, whether it be meat or vegetarian, it's going to make a difference. And in more ancient times, when they still used to eat meat, animals were not subjected to the kind of factory farming practices that we see today. And that's a lot of the reason why meat is such a unhealthy thing these days. So again, going back to the purest source, not only physically but vibrationally, I think is the direction we need to go.
We just brought up Ormus, and there is a question here about white powdered gold and if we could recommend a good source for that.
Well, unfortunately, that's again, when we channeled about that, the guide said it depends on the consciousness of the alchemist relative to your consciousness. So if you're buying it from an alchemist whose consciousness is lower than yours, then the Ormus will not be beneficial for you. If you're buying it from an alchemist whose consciousness is substantially higher than yours, then the Ormus is probably better for you and will be beneficial. So you can't make a generalized recommendation of a particular brand. If I were to say, I'll go to this company and buy this particular brand, but your consciousness happens to be very high and that alchemist's consciousness is not at that level, it may have no effect. So now the other thing the guide said, which I also have understood as well, is that the alchemist is evolving while preparing Ormus. So an alchemist who's been preparing Ormus for a long time is probably going to have a higher consciousness level, assuming everything else is equal, right? Everybody starts at the same consciousness level, which is not true. But, so if a particular alchemist has been doing this and been preparing their preparations for decades now, that may be a good one to try. Now, from my own experience, I will say that when I first met Barb, one of the tests that I put her through to evaluate what her ability was, because I'm a skeptical person by nature, was that I had all these different kinds of Ormus, because prior to meeting Barb, I had gone to the first Ormus conference. And at that conference, I met lots of alchemists, and I picked up all different kinds of Ormus. And I tried all these different ones, and I took each one and had Barb look at my aura to see what, if any, difference it made, and it was all across the board. Some of them did nothing. Some of them actually made my energy field worse and smaller, and some of them had a little bit of an expansive effect. And there was one in particular that just completely was off the charts. And it was prepared by an alchemist that I just met as a friend then, who wasn't even preparing it for sale. And I reached out to him many years ago, and he was not actually preparing it for sale. And I just recently, after we did the Channel Revelation show, decided to try to reach out to him again and to see if he would make it for me, so we can test it again. And he said he would, but who's to say at this point? Because he doesn't do it professionally to make a living, so his products are not available. But I will keep you posted. If he does actually prepare it and we can actually test it. And he did say that the preparation he was using was unique, and he explained to me why it was, and now I can understand why it might have been so much more powerful or expansive than any of the other types that we tried. And I just genuinely, when I met him decades ago, had a good feeling about him and his abilities. So I'm not surprised that Ormus tested so far beyond all the others that we had here. And I'm hoping to get another opportunity to try whatever he would prepare now. And it's been about maybe, actually that wasn't decades ago, maybe about 10 or 12 years ago I met him. So if we do get to try it and test it out, and I can convince him to actually produce it for other people, we'll make sure we mention that in the future. But as far as you're concerned right now, I would suggest find the most experienced alchemists who've been doing it the longest and just try their different products and see what works for you. Because for one person whose consciousness may not be as high, any Ormus may work. For another person whose consciousness may be very high, there may not be an Ormus that's being produced, or maybe one particular one will make a big impact, whereas the other ones will have no impact at all. So that would be my suggestion.
I think everyone's unique in terms of how Ormus is going to feel to them, because I've tried various brands as well, and I haven't used this one for a long time, but I know whitepowderedgold.com sold one that I really, really liked personally for me, but it's been a good number of years since I've used it. Someone asked me in the Inner Circle community on Facebook whether or not there was any evidence of shifts. How would you feel? I know you're not one to feel any changes when you take it, but I'm extremely sensitive. And one of the things that I notice about a good quality Ormus is it gives me this heightened state of awareness where I become very present and very crystal clear, but almost a little blissful. You just can kind of feel that little tingle at first where you're in a higher vibrational state. So I think in everyone being different, we have to try some out and see how they affect us throughout the day to really choose, the one that's best. Mm-hmm. Okay, in the last podcast, Micheila shared her experience on a ship. Did the ship take you up physically? I thought you said earlier it wasn't physical, but lots of people have had physical contact on ships and procedures done to them. Just wondering what you have to say on this subject. So the experience that I talked about in the last podcast was more of a telepathic experience. It was kind of interesting because I would say I bilocated. So I was sitting out on my deck with a cup of coffee one morning. It was the morning after I saw the ship, and I had kind of requested a little visitation. And I had slept a full 8 hours. I was not sleepy at all. But as I was sitting, I noticed I was just uncontrollably drifting off to sleep. And as my eyes closed, I was literally seeing myself, like the light body of myself, being transported up in this tunnel of light. And then when I got onto the ship, I had an experience of the various beings that were there. They were actually Arcturian, by the way. And some of them looked very different than others. So there were very different dimensional expressions of Arcturians on the ship. I actually have an Arcturian guide. She calls herself the matriarch, and she was there. And I had a healing actually on that ship that day. And it was a plasma ship. And I've been on several ships or have had experience before where before you return, it's almost like you become this, I would say you become one with the ship. It's a very weird experience to explain, where my plasma almost became one with the entire ship. And then when it was over, I saw myself floating back. But the entire time this thing was going on, I was like I was having a remote viewing experience of it. So I kind of knew that my physical self or my physical body was in the chair while my consciousness was elsewhere having another experience. But definitely 100%. I know that people have very, very physical experiences on ships, but even then, I think we are going into those experiences in an altered state, in more of a highly plasmic state. So for example, for me to channel, I'm using my plasma, and in so doing, I'm entering more of a multidimensional state than I am when I'm just sitting here speaking with Ethan and all of you. And I think the same is true when we're in the presence of a ship or we think we're physically having an experience on a ship is we're operating more in our plasma. So we're using a more multidimensional part of our technology in order to observe and have interaction with interdimensional. So that's a huge topic, and absolutely, I know procedures are done and genetic alterations and testing happens. I've channeled on a lot of that in private session. I think some of it is malevolent and some of it is benevolent. So we, across the board, we have those experiences happening today. I think that's a good place to wrap it up. We didn't get through all of the questions today. There are several more we could have gone into, but I'm sure we'll do another episode like this where we pull the questions together and answer them in a podcast format. Next week, we'll have another episode of Channeled Revelations where Ethan asks the questions of the guides. So thanks for tuning in. Be sure to follow us on your favorite streaming platform, and we'll see you again next week.